Hello, welcome. Today I am joined by Dr. Tim Swan, who is a consultant in sport and exercise medicine. Tim, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So whereabouts are you today?
I'm based up in County Durham in North England, and I tend to do all my sports medicine practice down in London and travel by the train commute and do 3 days a week.
Very good. Now, not to put the pressure on, but I've mentioned to a few people that I'm doing one of these with you, and they've said, "Oh, Tim has got loads of amazing stories." So, no pressure, but I'm looking forward to it.
We'll see.
So yeah, in terms of doing that commute, then, so are you from the northeast originally? Like, how did you end up in the northeast, and as well as doing your clinics down in London?
So yes, my parents used to have a pub in the Yorkshire Dales. I was based in Yorkshire, and I got married in this part of the world. So we've returned to where we started, really. But obviously, because I've had a fairly long career in the armed forces, we've moved all over the world and travelled to multiple countries and have about 16 houses, I think. So finally come to rest where we started.
Right. So in terms of growing up, then, so whereabouts in Yorkshire were you?
So it's a place called Leyburn in the North Yorkshire Dales. It's near to Catterick Garrison, which is where I ended up working when I was moved back up into this part of the world.
Right. And then in terms of getting into this field, how did you end up moving into this world?
So I was a rugby player myself and played sort of in the National Leagues, Premiership. And when I was in the teams, we used to play against, Harlequins, Saracens, Bath, Gloucester, everyone. And we never really had any sports medicine support. And actually, our doctor for my club that I played with when I was playing then was a gynecologist. So he was very good at stitching, but not a lot else. So people in the changing room used to ask me what I thought about their injuries, and I got more interested and thought, well, actually, I could do this. And then I joined the armed forces because I was offered to do my second degree of medicine. They offered to sponsor me through the armed forces so that I could play for the army at Twickenham. So when I was a third-year medical student, I was the pack leader for the army at Twickenham, having never been to Sandhurst, didn't know the first thing about the army, and you run out in front of 65,000 thinking, what's going on? So it all sort of stemmed from my playing days, to tell you the truth. And gradually I started to realise that there was a bit of a lack of sports medicine support and people who are interested in MSK-related injuries.
Yeah, I mean, that is incredible. I used to play football with a guy that played for the RAF, which maybe that's the competitors for you guys, but I couldn't believe they were basically professional athletes. I don't think he did any real work other than he went and played football in amazing parts of the world.
Yeah, I think, I joined the army because I did 2 degrees. The first degree, which was biochemistry, and then I did medicine second. And of course, funding myself through the second course was somewhat difficult. And then the army sort of said, well, actually, we'd like you to join, give 5 years back, be a doctor in the army and play rugby for us. And I went, actually, that sounds pretty good. So the team I played with when I started had 4 internationals in the pack, and I was the pack leader. So we had a number 8 for England, captain of Scotland, and 2 props for Scotland. And everybody in that pack was playing in what's now the Premiership, what was then was the leagues, League One, and basically we turned out and played against the RAF and the Navy, and in all the time I played against the Navy, we never lost. So it was pretty much a grudge game. There was always lots of people who went to that game and alcohol was drunk by the people watching. However, it was a big match, whereas the RAF game never got anywhere near those sort of numbers. You had 5,000 people, you'd be doing well. So the Army-Navy game was the big game, and I was fortunate never to be on the losing side.
So what was it like? What was it like in terms of being competitive? Like how competitive was it?
So compared to the level we were playing, because we had Tim Rodborough, who was a British Lion in England, back row player. We had Rob Wainwright, who is a doctor as well in the army, but he was always away with Scotland, and he went with the British Lions as well. And then the other two were also sort of, Scottish international players. So in those days, we could get away with playing sport at a decent level, but also managing to work. And, some people, I think I spent half my career covering Rob Wainwright when he was away because, he was the international and I wasn't. But I still played a decent level of rugby, and I represented, England levels at various things, and played in the sort of Junior World Cup, the first one that was in France in 1988. So, it's allowed us to play sport and to learn. And the thing that really sort of got my attention once I joined was I realised that the organisation were highly supportive in trying to get you well educated, give you the right courses, give you the opportunities to develop your skill sets. And in other organisations in the UK in medicine, that doesn't occur. There's a limit, there's a budget, and you don't have that level of support. So really down to what you were interested in, as long as you did the job that the army required. So I travelled and did Northern Ireland 9 months, but I spent the time commuting backwards and forwards playing rugby in between during the weeks. So I was in the Northern Ireland for the weekends, and during the week I'd be playing rugby and I'd be commuting backwards and forwards. And then we went on operational tours, and we went to former Republic of Yugoslavia and against Serbia, and we provided other support in operational environments. But equally, every time I got back, people said, "What's your speciality? What would you like to do?" So I started off with hospital medicine and did emergency medicine and ITU, and tried to do some think about being a consultant physician. But then I recognised that hospital medicine, the requirements were just going to be crazy and very onerous and affect your family life when you had one. So I decided that probably wasn't the way to go. So I decided to take on general practice with the proviso that I could do sports medicine, which wasn't a speciality in itself at that time. And because I was in big practices in Germany, in Cyprus, all over, and in the UK, people said, well, actually, this guy is really interested in musculoskeletal medicine. We'll just send all the cases to him. So by definition, I'd be in a general practice, but probably 70% of what I saw was musculoskeletal. And I just got a reputation for taking an interest in all joints, and everyone said, well, I'll go and see him. And that's really how it all started.
Yeah, that's amazing then. So what was the medical setup then within the military at that point?
So we had a National Defence Rehabilitation Centre, which is called DMRC Headley Court, which was based down near Leatherhead. And that was a sort of centre for the rehabilitation for the armed forces, which was Army, Air Force, Navy, Special Forces. While we were sort of involved in the Headley Court, I got involved in Headley Court as I was doing more sports medicine, and they sort of took me on board to do my training under consultants who were specialised. And one of them, doctors there, was the chief medical officer for the British Olympic team for the Olympics, and done about 5 or 6 cycles. So there was people with lots of experience in elite sport, but also in the military. They were generally physicians by trade, so they were rheumatologists or general physicians, but did sports medicine as well. And they sort of passed on their skills, their knowledge, and gave us the training to do, musculoskeletal as a speciality. And really, without them, we would never have achieved what we achieved, because the training was immense. And it's interestingly that as I've been in the forces for 24 years, as we developed in sports medicine, then more and more people in the training programs in sports medicine who were in civilian posts came to Headley Court for a 6-month attachment to try and do proper hands-on musculoskeletal work. And we had inpatients, groups of hundreds of people of different groups, from shoulder-related injuries, upper limb, to spinal injuries, to lower limb, hip and groin, to complex trauma. And all of these patients were there to be, as an asset for people to learn and understand what they're trying to achieve. So most of the people who'd done the training programs and the SBRs came back and said, out of my training program, that was the best time I've ever had. And as I stayed in the rehabilitation world at Headley Court, I started to get a consultant post once I qualified in sports medicine. And then some of the people that came through us as trainees, we offered them posts, and they took up posts as civilians working for us at Headley Court, and 2 or 3 of them worked for 3 or 4 years and really became very experienced and good skills. And all of those people have subsequently moved on and gone to quite high profile jobs in Lawn Tennis Association, in professional football and Premiership sides and all sorts. So it was a good grounding, and we developed these additional rehab facilities, which were peripheral ones, because obviously the centre couldn't take the whole of the armed forces, which at that time was 150,000 personnel. So we started to have these satellite units, which were dotted around the country. So in the UK, we had a couple, one for the RAF, one down for the Aldershot for the Army, one up north in Catterick, and another one up the A1 for the RAF. And then there was finally one down for the Navy down in Portsmouth. So basically, these rehab centres were sort of like mini rehabilitation centres of a Headley Court, and they were there for the primary care people in the region to send people in who had more complicated injuries, post-ACL repairs, hip and groin pain, back pain, shoulder impingement, etc., and all the sort of things that didn't really respond in the normal physiotherapy setting. They got referred to a local rehabilitation centre with more skill sets, with rehabilitation instructors and occupational staff as well, who could help them try to rehabilitate. And the vast majority of those patients would respond, and the ones that struggled to respond, then they would be sent centrally to Headley Court for us to take them on because they were more complicated. And that's effectively how the system worked.
Yeah, no, it's quite impressive. We went to Headley Court quite a few times beforehand. So in terms of those rehab units, because I know that you had the RRUs, regional rehab units, yeah. And then so what were they more specialist ones, the ones that you were mentioning?
So the RRUs are sort of the mini Headley Courts, which were the ones I've just described, and an awful lot of people who are SBRs or are trained in sports medicine have taken on civilian roles in those RRUs, providing the sports medicine support. So as long as they're qualified and they're on the register for sports medicine, then there's an opportunity for people to work in the military. And lots of people have sort of cut their teeth on sports medicine and MSK by doing that, because there's a high input of patients, there's a high number of MSK, there's lots of support and mechanisms and protocols for managing injuries, and people have gone, I want that job. So, you know, there's a large number of people who are now in my speciality who've either been in the military or worked for the military at either Headley Court centrally or more in the RRUs.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting setup, and there's some incredible facilities. And that, from your side, did you have a goal of what you wanted to be? Like, I know you'd kind of almost fallen into it from the sounds of it with the rugby and then progressing into it, but did you have a vision or goal for yourself?
Yeah, well, I sort of had once I realised that sports medicine was the way to go and the speciality was there. The trouble was, it wasn't there as a speciality when I was going through training. So it was only on the back of London 2012 that we actually got specialist training running. And we had our own faculty, and we suddenly were registered, and we had a college, and we were associated with the Royal College of Surgeons in London and the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh. So it was a split association. And that all went through in around 2006 as a specialist training program. And then suddenly they started to look for people to join it, and they did grandfather right access for people who had skills in sports medicine, been doing it for a long time. So they had to prove the evidence that they've got training or appropriate training in SEM. And then they started to have people go through training programs. And, you know, I was at the time when that was on the cards, and myself and a colleague of mine in the military, we both decided that we were just going to sit the training program, even though we'd already had plenty of sports medicine support, because we wanted to be seen to be doing the curriculum properly, and we wanted to complete the training program. So on the back of the fact that we had a fair bit of experience, we were subsequently allowed to reduce our training program from 4 years to 3 years because of our previous experience. And then we completed our 3 years, then got our ticket as a specialist in sport and exercise medicine.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. And then from your side, had you ever looked at maybe moving into some of that the sports teams and working for them directly?
So I've worked for lots of people. When I was SBR, I used to run the football at Aldershot Town Football Club when they were League Division 2, and then we're pushing on for League Division 1. Unfortunately, they're no longer in those leagues. But at those times, it was very good. We had a QPR player coach called Gary Waddock, and he was superb. And I really enjoyed working with them. I've done about 60% of the England rugby teams at various levels in the elite program and in the aspirational programs. I've worked in British English hockey, and I've done an England cricket tour to India as well. And then on top of that, I've done 15 years in professional golf with the European Tour and now the DP World Tour.
Right, yeah, no, I'd like to touch more on that. And then in terms of like the military side, like when you were going over to these places, you're going over to some very active places, I would have thought at the time. What was it like from a safety perspective, or how did you feel?
So yeah, I mean, there were incidents where, particularly in Afghanistan, where some groups in the military, there was some police RMPs who went out on patrols with local Afghan forces, and they came back into their compound and then locked the gates and took all their kits off, and then the Afghans turned and fired on them and killed them all. So even though you had, Afghan people working, some of them were doing pot cleaning and pans and toilets, and other people were doing electrical stuff, and they were on the camps. You always just had to be concerned that you were not 100% safe. But as long as you were, carried a weapon, you were, obviously looking around for signs of people being uneasy, then you were always on the alert that there might be something that could happen. But generally speaking, it was as safe as anything. We developed a concept for Headley Court of having an on-site rehabilitation facility in Camp Bastion, and that was so that people didn't have to leave Afghanistan to come all the way to the UK to do rehabilitation, be deemed fit to return to service, and then be shipped out again because it was taking too long and too costly to lose people out of theatre. So what we decided to do was to provide physiotherapy, experienced physios and experienced rehab instructors, set up a training facility in a massive dome tent. We had an MRI on site next to the hospital, and we could scan people, do clinics and assess injuries and make decisions which were, were injuries be able to be rehabbed locally, and if so, would use the facilities to do so. Otherwise, they'd be casevaced and sent back to the UK to then go back to Headley Court and be rehabbed in a more long-term plan. And that worked very well because we were starting to turn people around with acute injuries, ankle inversion injuries, shoulder injuries. Some of them were training-related injuries, as in weight training, and when people had time, they were doing other activities. And so we managed people with those, and we could then return them back to their job online. And the higher chain of command was, quite pleased with that because it meant that we retain resources in operation.
And how have things changed in the military? Because like with a lot of things, it's government funded with it. So like, how is
yeah, so the cuts are making a big difference. The size of the armed forces is reducing significantly all the time. When I started and there was extra so we say slack in the system, it allowed us to be able to do adventure training, to do sport and to work. And as the forces has got tighter and tighter, people are doing pre-deployment training before they go on operations. They go on operations, they have some leave and they come back, and then they go straight onto pre-deployment training again because units are having to turn around so quickly. So it's becoming an awful lot more onerous. There's a lot of the perks that we used to have are not quite where they were. And however, if you're still a doctor within the armed forces, they will still support you significantly towards your training. I mean, for example, I wanted to do musculoskeletal ultrasound because I thought it was pivotal to care, and I got funded to go and do a course for that. I was given the funding. We bought machines, we had all the equipment, and we just started to provide a musculoskeletal ultrasound service. And then some of my colleagues followed along. They did the same thing. And once we got a team of us, then I could back off and somebody else would take over that service. And even after I left the army, I did a year and a half of running a musculoskeletal ultrasound service for them, because we were still waiting for some of those individuals to qualify in their diagnostic and interventional ultrasound. And once they achieved that qualification, then it was time for me to walk and let them manage it themselves. So it started the whole process. You know, I was fortunate. I was backed by my immediate boss, who was very good at supporting me, and therefore, you know, we moved on in terms of attaining further skills and providing an extended service.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people on here that are friends, as well as that I've chatted to on here, like John Etherington and Duncan Robertson, the two ones that are in the military there. And it does sound like a really, like, it is a very good grounding and like a really good exposure, not only in terms of the things that you're supported with, but also just in terms of life skills and development.
Well, John Etherington was my immediate boss, so it was down to him to give me the funding to do the courses. So fortunately, that was seen to be favourable, and it was good for the service and good for us. So as long as we came up with things that were going to benefit the service and also ensure that we had an operational role, then that justified our jobs, basically. And you know, if you don't have an operational role, then you start to lose your speciality. So we've always been advised by John Etherington to try to make sure that we have an operational role in terms of servicing and looking after people with injuries, but also being there on the ground to diagnose and manage things locally. And that's been fundamental, really, to our service provision. But you know, at its height, with the injuries from Iraq and Afghanistan, I mean, there's been well over 1,000 amputees going through Headley Court, and you know, there was a lot of collaboration with the Walter Reed in America and the United States Army in terms of their management of trauma and their catastrophic injuries that they had. So that sort of collaboration helped us move forwards. We had all the limb, in terms of our amputees, with above knee, through knee, or below knee amputees. We had all the prosthetic support to provide high quality prosthesis to our individuals and support them, including running legs. And that was well received by all the patients.
So what was it like working with John then?
Yeah, he was outstanding as a leader. He coordinated and ran a team of at least 20 consultants at its peak, some civilian and the rest of them military. And it was a big unit, and it was a busy unit with a lot of turnover. But all the teams were very proactive. They had good outcomes. They were monitoring data. There was research being done. They were setting up protocols. We were reviewing the protocols, and this was all very much driven. And it was John who basically did that and tried to insist that we'd all keep moving forwards. So the delivery of the service was never stand still. It was only ever improving. And then just as I left, and shortly afterwards, there was potentially a move for Headley Court, which was going to be difficult because we had a lot of civilian staff who had worked at Headley for a number of years, who had been living in the area and had huge skill sets, and they were going to pick it up and move it to Loughborough, and a lot of those staff were going, I'm not going to move. So you lose a lot of experience, and that's been part of the problem of transition of moving from Headley Court to Stamford Hall.
And how is that transition going? Because I know it's been a few years now.
Yeah, it's been tough for them. I think a lot of the people who are now consultants are all people who were trained when we were consultants, and so things have moved on. But the numbers and the volume of the specialist cadre has got smaller, and it was developed with financial funding, and it was there because it was near to Loughborough. There was other reasons. It was close to the QE hospital, which was the receiving hospital from operational deployments, which was in Birmingham. So it was just deemed that it was going to be logistically a better move. But I think it's had its issues, and that's probably related to moving of personnel and military people and civilian people. Clearly, the volume of numbers is from operational type injuries is nowhere near what it was, because we're not in any significant conflict taking injuries at this moment in time. But if that happened, then I think the unit would be quite challenged, because I think there's constantly adverts looking for staff to work at full.
Yeah, well, no, hopefully it does get going, and because it's an amazing initiative and it's got incredible facilities. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then in terms of Elands, you mentioned golf. How did you get involved with golf?
So golf was by chance again, really. I met Roger Hawkes, who was the chief medical officer for the European Tour, and he was on the specialist register, not having completed the training program, but he did it because he had experience in sports medicine. And he had a close liaison with the military. He used to meet up when we used to be at conferences. And he said, well, why don't you come to Wentworth and come and help out at Wentworth, which is the biggest event of the calendar year for the European Tour. So initially we started I started providing sort of crowd cover support, because obviously there's over 200,000 people who tend to go to Wentworth in a week. And we used to have quite a few ball strikes and people with developing myocardial infarcts with chest pain, and we've had people with epileptic seizures and CVAs and various things that just happened to be happening on the course, and we had to respond appropriately. And then gradually he said, well, now you can start doing a bit of the MSK support as well. And they originally gave us a porter cabin on hole 5, which was about 1,200 meters away from the clubhouse at least, and nowhere near the sort of practice facilities and nowhere near the players where they were. And we started off there, and I said, well, who's going to come and see us here? They've got to be in a buggy to come and get to us. They're not going to be interested. And as the years progressed, we moved from car park 5 to car park 3 to car park 2. And until eventually we said, well, actually, we need to be between the range and the putting green. And they went, well, that's a prime site, and we've got all of the club manufacturers and everything else. And we go, well, surely the players need the best support. And eventually that's where we've been. Now we're right in the middle of the hub of Wentworth. We're on the range, we're next to the players' lounge, and players just come straight in and see us all the time. And we've got the truck with all the equipment on, and we've just had a new truck that's been developed, which will be coming on tour now or very shortly, which is a rehabilitation, a gym, and there's a strength and conditioning truck, as well as our clinical treatment truck.
Yeah, it sounds incredible then. So what sort of people would you be seeing then in that?
So in the golf circuit, we see anybody who's on the tour, basically, because some of them will have their own physiotherapists, but the vast majority don't. And some of them have their own strength and conditioning coaches, others don't. So we offer S&C. We have specialists at S&C who come. We set up a gym area for them. They get given programs, they're monitored. They try to develop goals and start to work with the coaches. We have physiotherapists, which we have 3 to 5, depending on how big the event is. And then we've got sports and support. So, Wentworth is occurring on the 9th to the 15th of September this year. And there'll be the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Andrew Murray, myself, and I'll be leading the BMW event, and he's overseeing other administrative stuff, and 2 of us will work together. And then we have Dr. Chris Neville, who is the Chief Medical Officer to the RNA, and he comes and provides support for the crowd cover for the event. And so the three of us are there, are all quite experienced. We know what we're doing. We've done it for a number of years, and it's a busy week. There's a lot going on, and even if it's busy on the course relating to the crowd, and there's incidents, and we have to respond to those if we're near enough, as well as trying to support the families, the tour staff, the players, the caddies, and everybody else.
Yeah, there's quite a lot, isn't it? There's quite a lot going on there, I think.
Well, yeah, we also tend to have additional clinics. So big events, of which obviously Wentworth is one, and the Scottish Open's another one, and the Belfry. We have additional services that come in. So we have a screening health clinic for the players and the staff, and they can go and get screened by the health team, and they look at their cardiovascular profile. They look at their do bloods, they do risk profiles for them and give them advice on terms of management. We have dermatology clinics because obviously it's an outdoor sport and we're in hot countries, and there's been a number of malignancies, skin malignancies, which have been picked up and treated appropriately without any issues because we run these dermatology clinics, which are done 3 or 4 times a year. And then we also have radiologists who come in to support us, and we do radiology clinics in conjunction with usually an orthopedic hand specialist to overlook at the hand and wrist injuries, because we have a lot of those as well. So all these services come in and sort of top up on bigger events, and the staff like it, and the players like it, the caddies like it, and they know where they can get some support, and they've got a booking sheet and they can book in at certain events, and they know they can see people.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And how has the game changed in the time that you've been working in there?
So yes, I mean there's an awful lot more coordination and planning now, and there's a lot more research that's being published. There's a lot of the stuff that's been done through the golf circuit is now being published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, and there's ongoing for research into health and well-being for golf, and which has been done in amateur sport, as well as looking at golf-related injuries, the epidemiology and the prevalence of the type of injuries that we see in golf. And there is a sort of an academic board that looks at areas for development and working with our colleagues across the world. So there's an ongoing meeting that's going to be at the Women's AIG Open in St Andrews on the end of this month, and I think the Scottish Sports Minister's going, and a load of the Professor Andrew Murray's running the meeting, and there's a number of people presenting from South Africa and various parts of the world, including one of the professors from Canada is coming, and they're going to be trying to coordinate activity around the world in the golf circuit, and it's a different game now to where it was 15 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the money in some of those sports is just astronomical now, isn't it? It really does change the dynamic.
But I think one of the things that has been revolutionary for the golf has been COVID, because when that came, everything got down. It was a bit of a disaster for professional sport and everybody being isolated, and there was a big push from the government to try to, entice people to be able to safely travel and still compete. So something was still on the people could still view in their houses sport that was active and on the telly. And we travelled with a laboratory with us, and we've travelled all over the world. And I went to Kenya with a team, and we did our testing of the locals on arrival and the bus drivers, and we had something like 35 positive cases out of about 350 on arrival, thinking this is going to be tough. But we had very strict rules. We kept everybody in a bubble. We didn't let people sit in more than groups of 4. They were 2 meters apart. They had their own people that they'd eat with and socialise with, and they weren't allowed to go outside those bubbles. And it was difficult, and some players and caddies struggled with that. But at the end of the day, we were still around the world playing golf. And then we had dispensation from the government when we came back, not to have to go into quarantine accommodation, but we could go and quarantine at home. And players were still allowed to go to clubs to practice, because that was deemed to be a work environment for them. And then they could go out again. So we went to places such as, I went to Cyprus and did 2 weeks there with a complete golf and country club where the gates were locked. We arrived in and nobody was allowed out or in really, and we just stayed there for 2 weeks. And we monitored people, and every week we did testing, and we did another testing. So we do sort of 1,500 tests over 2 weeks between week 1 and week 2. And we kept on top of things, and anybody who had symptoms, we could quarantine them, and then we would go from there. So, and that sort of work got published, and other sports started to follow the same lines. And golf sort of set a bit of an example through Andrew Murray and other sports such as England cricket and football were all involved and motivating in trying to work out how they could still do business in a controlled environment. But it was a bit weird in those times of getting on your flight and there was only 30 people on the plane and travelling around in a train to go down to London to the airport, and there'd be 2 people in the carriage. So unusual period in terms of what we were doing. And we were still travelling with all our equipment and medical support, and then we'd have a lab on site to do all our testing and keep an eye on making sure our players, caddies, and everybody was safe.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting time. I mean, Andrew Murray's he's an interesting guy, isn't he? But I've done one of these with him, like with his marathons.
Yeah, he's an ultra marathon. I mean, whenever he's anywhere, he just pops out for a couple of hours in the evenings and says, "Oh, I fancy dinner, but I'm going for a run." And I said, "Well, what time's that going to be then?" Because he'll disappear for 2 hours and do it wherever. Goes off from Wentworth and disappears and does a big run and then comes back and has dinner. But he still fits it into his working day and is busy at the best of times.
Yeah, no, it is. It's impressive. And then in terms of like for you then, so what are your plans? So you've been involved with loads of different things. You've still got you've got an operation that you run in the Northeast. Tell me a bit more about what that involves.
So because I'm up here, my wife's a podiatrist, and we decided there was an opportunity in the Northeast, in Northallerton, which is just off the A1. It's a market town. It's quite thriving. There's lots. And we basically took a unit which was 2 floors, and we've completely revamped it and put a new structure in. We've got 4 clinical rooms, a sluice room, a kitchen, staff room, and we've got 2 podiatry rooms. We've got the largest room is a physio room. We've put in a squat rack which hangs off the wall and can be put up and save space by being against the wall, but can drop out with an Olympic bar and all the weights. We've got further other equipment for them. And we've got a room next door which we can have a gate walkway and a treadmill and do some running re-education and look at gait analysis and podiatry provision of orthotics. So it opened in May, and it's now started to pick up quite nicely, and we've started to provide more services, and we've got Shockwave, and we'll have diagnostic ultrasound, and we'll probably get a bigger cart machine, hopefully, which we've been in discussions with, and we can see how things progress. But there isn't really an opportunity, anything in the region that can challenge what we're providing, and we've set the bar quite high. And obviously, from all the clinics I've worked in, plus Headley Court and general experience, we know what that should be. So we're trying to make it look the part, have decent protocols, monitor what's going on. We're going to do some auditing of our patient population so that we can feed back to patient outcome data. And we're just trying to do it right, really. And we're not in a rush. We're just building it up nice and steadily. And it's already picking up quite nicely. So the next goal is to get it CQC'd, because otherwise no doctors can work in there. And then potentially I can do a day a week there, or maybe more. But equally, I could try and look for somebody who might be interested in the Northeast of doing sports medicine, maybe working alongside me, and we can do some MSK related clinics together. So I think liaising with the local rugby clubs, the running clubs, the park runs, the golf clubs, there's loads going on, and it's basically an opportunity to start to say, look, we can deal with MSK related injuries.
And what do you see the opportunities or the market, I guess, to be like? Because it's like it'll have changed a lot in your time of doing it. But like, where do you see the private healthcare market?
Well, it's very interesting because of the way the NHS is running at the moment, and it's struggling to to deal with MSK-related injuries is not a high concern for them because it's not critical. Therefore, there's an awful lot of work from MSK that is now coming into the private sector. And that's either with people having private medical insurance or through funding strategies by the NHS to put it into the private sector to clear some of their backlog. So for me, it seems that all the clinics are loaded. It doesn't matter where you go, everybody's loaded. There's lots of MSK, there's plenty of opportunity. So it's just trying to provide a decent support in terms of locally for people to get MSK injuries resolved. And I'm going to start joining the local CCGs and start to speak to the GPs and saying, look, we're only down the road. This is our background. This is what we do. And if you've got people with sports medicine or MSK related injuries and you have concerns, then why don't you use us? I've been in discussions with a couple of providers to see whether we can get some support to having a new MRI put into the region, and there is some interest by some of the providers because they recognise there's a bit of a shortfall in the region, and therefore actually if they put something in like that it would be quite useful. So those are people I've worked with, and they're saying, well, actually if you're going to set up a clinic up there, then we might be interested in providing some financial support to put an MRI facility in your region. So we're just trying to get things going and see who's interested. But I think in time, I think it could be quite good for the region and offer them, something that is not there at the moment.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it will be. And then in terms of when you're recruiting or whoever it is it's there, like what do you look for, like the non-clinical skills that you think are important to be a success in, whether it's medicine or any walk of life?
Well, I'm looking for people who have some direction, are motivated, and are keen to. If they have an interest in MSK and are already starting to accrue some skill sets in that direction, be that an allied healthcare professional, be that a physician, that's even better. So clearly, from a physio perspective, I'm trying to offer the best sort of room I can offer that's got everything that a physio will want, and facilities that will give them additional support. We can use force plates, we can do some measurements with that, particularly with the weights, and doing some functional testing. We've got the gait facility, we've got the running re-education. So if somebody comes along who's got extended skill sets, then the answer is that'd be absolutely superb. But equally, if somebody has initial training, which is useful in terms of MSK, but then they are also particularly interested in trying to develop outside of their training skills, then I'm happy to support them, because I think what we need to be is a clinic that shows we're prepared to fund people and allow them to get skills to develop their service to then give us an extended service. So I don't think it's down to the individual to have to find people to do it or pay for themselves. I think, for us, it's trying to support all the staff who work in the clinic.
Definitely. How important do you think it is for anyone doing whatever it is they're doing to be authentic in terms of just what they believe in, what they want to do?
I think it's very important. I think there's a lot of people who are not as motivated as others, and do not want the pressure of having to run a service. They like to be in a service which is provided, and they're happy to work with people. But obviously, if people are very authentic and very committed and have insight, then those people will be like gold. They will accelerate and enhance a service. The key for me is what I've always missed in working in private practice is basically the Headley Court model, which is the multidisciplinary team environment. And I really would like to return to that environment. And therefore, I'm trying to get involved with people where we can form a multidisciplinary team, we can work together, we can try to do some audits and potential reviews and develop as a group, because that's really about good clinical practice. And it means that people are working in a symbiotic way, rather than in London, life is very much more individual. And unless you work in a group which is coordinated like a John Etherington looking after all the clinicians who work at Pure Sports Medicine, then it's very difficult to find a group where people are managed. It's all about, here's your room, you're coming in as a sole practitioner, you leave and somebody in-house takes over your room. So I'm trying to get away from that type of individual practice, and I'd like to work in a more multidisciplinary role, and that opportunity has sort of come up in London for me recently.
So yeah, what kind of setup is that?
So that's a financial institution that has an on-site medical facility inside their institution. They've got a commercial gym which is second to none. I mean, it's on par with what we had at Headley Court. They have 15 clinical rooms. They've got a consultant psychiatrist, 2 psychologists, 5 physiotherapists, 2 osteopaths, 5 GPs, and currently they've got 1 sports medicine physician, and they're looking to enhance that and potentially get even further people involved. So it's very much a multidisciplinary team environment, and it's possibly what I've been looking for. And there was a point where much longer will I commute to London from the north? Well, actually, with this job on offer, I've decided I'll probably take the opportunity, because I think it's a multidisciplinary team environment that I'm looking for.
Yeah, no, sounds very exciting. And then the last question then, so what would your advice be for people that are considering moving into the world of healthcare?
So healthcare is difficult times, I think, the way things are going with the NHS. I think I did a job in Stafford area for 9 months and found life to be very disillusioned for a lot of people, and they were struggling to work in the environment. I think you have to have a passion for healthcare. That we all got into it because we wanted to do the job and work with people and help patients, and that hasn't changed for me. I'm still passionate about what I do, and I enjoy the conundrums of working out the clinical problems and what's the best fit way of trying to return people to their former level of activity. So if people generally have some interest in it, they've just got to find the right opportunity to work with people who are committed, so that they can get some good experience and then decide on what that pathway is going to be in terms of professional courses, exams, qualifications, to get into the areas and the fields they want to get into. But it's with a lot of systems now, the level of funding and support is not that great, and there's a lot of people who are in some jobs where they are committed because of their pensions, but they can't really leave the services. And it's a tough call, particularly for the new government, to try and work out how to sort out the ongoing problems in the NHS. But the system was built, last century, and it doesn't appear to be really fit for service. And just throwing money at it doesn't seem to be the answer. That's happened already, and it hasn't really worked. So I think somebody has to try and redevelop and redesign the healthcare system in the UK, I think.
Yeah, and then I will throw in one more question actually as well. Like how do you manage the different roles that you're doing? Like you mentioned several there with golf, Northeast, another job down there. You're involved in a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be the chief examiner for the sports medicine diploma, and then the membership exam in the Faculty of Sports Medicine in Edinburgh. And that was another role we used to do, and run the national exams and try to improve the quality of the exams. It's not easy to do this, but if you look at most of the people in sports medicine, they've all got multi-hatted jobs. They've got working in practices, working with teams, with other things. So in our speciality, it's not unusual to have to manage multiple jobs at the same time. It's just trying to allot the right time frame to all of the requirements that you need to provide. I'm just going through my appraisal process at the moment for revalidation, and you've got to provide the evidence of how you're keeping yourself professionally up to date, what you're trying to achieve and what you've been doing, and that's everything in all the jobs. And I actually started a bit of an MBA course as well, because I was quite interested in the business side and trying to work out on how that works with medicine and financial planning. And actually the strategy, business management and everything else is aligned with what we do in health services. It's just that most of the physicians and clinicians who work in health services don't have that as a background. So I'm just having a look at it to see what that entails, really.
Yeah, no, I think it's really like professional development, and I can tell that's something that's really, really important to you. Are there any like books that you'd recommend that have helped you with productivity or?
So there's a couple of books which I think are outstanding in terms of giving you insight and working with the population and people. There's one called Surrounded by Idiots, okay, which is the concept, which is, you know, we have a natural affinity with people that we like, but if we don't like people or they don't fit into our skill set, then we think that they're all idiots. And the whole book is about recognizing that there's lots of people around the table. Everybody's a bit different, but also everybody's got something to offer. And it's the sum of the parts is greater than the individuals around the table. Okay, and so that book's a very good book. And there's another one, a couple of book series by somebody, and I got this from a conference I did in sports medicine at Arsenal, and it's a guy called Patrick Lencioni, and he wrote a couple of books on the ideal team player, and which is all about the concepts of what you're looking for to get the ideal team player. And he describes a series of Venn diagram of 3 rings of the different types of people, of which there's the type A person, which is the, you know, I want everything in the page of written down on A4. They're a strong leader. They don't take fools and suffer anybody who's going to cause problems. But then you also need people who are team players. You also need people who are into the scientific data, because all of these people give you a balanced team. So you don't want all Red Bulls at the gate, because otherwise decision making is very difficult. So Lencioni's Ideal Team Player is a very good book, because it takes you through the process and talks through all of the areas of how you look at teams and how teams function. And then he wrote another book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And that's really interesting. And it shows how teams fail and where the failures go as a result of a pyramid. And he takes you through the pyramid, and you look at the things like inattention to results, etc. But you need to have trust in the team and an ability to feel open, that you can discuss things without feeling foolish. And this is all fundamental to being in a good team. So I found those books pretty fundamental to what I'm trying to achieve. And they've been really good books to read.
I think that's really interesting. And it's like, I've been doing some research into this now. And I think that actual skill set isn't always conducive to this environment, because people don't want to show vulnerability. They don't want to show they don't know the answers to things. And particularly in sport, I would say it is a big one in that, where it's a very competitive environment.
Yeah, so I think, you know, you have to develop people around you where you have a complete trust in the team, and that no question is a foolish question. You know, if you've thought it, then somebody else has probably thought it. But people go, oh, I don't want to raise my hand in this environment because I feel that I'll be deemed to be foolish, or they'll decide that I'm no good for the team, and then they worry about the consequences. So if you can inherently develop a strong feeling of trust where nobody's being judged, and then you can start to be open, well, that actually opens the gates for you to be forward thinking and to think outside the box and offer things that other people won't offer, because you are now trying to expand your horizons rather than being introverted and being very withdrawn and keeping your thoughts to yourself. So I think if you look at the people like Google and various other companies, they've all done that, and you know, they've tried to change the way they do business, because some of them say, well, you know, most of the businesses, the target diagram is working from out to in, and what they're saying is from in to out. Okay. So when you're trying to look at ways of doing or finding answers to problems, it's just the way you perceive it. And if you can start to get more and more people who are thinking creatively and that don't feel threatened in the environment, then the answer is more opportunities will occur. And I think that's what a number of companies have done, and other companies now are trying to follow those business models.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, that's really interesting insight. But I really appreciate your time. I know you've got several projects that you're working on. So good luck with the London opportunity, and very best of luck with the in the Northeast as well.
It's a pleasure, and I look forward to liaising with you in the near future.
Likewise. Brilliant. Thanks for your time, Tim. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye-bye.